Good evening. My name is Hilary Hauck. Welcome to the Festival of Books in the Alleghenies 2020 Author Series. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. The Festival of Books in the Alleghenies is an annual event that rotates between Somerset, Bedford, and Cambria counties in Pennsylvania. As part of our mission, we support local and regional authors, local communities, and literacy. As we're unable to meet in person this year, we're bringing our authors to you. Please join us every Wednesday at 7 p.m. All of our authors have a fascinating story to tell. And little shout out and thank you to Dave Pop for making this all possible. He is our tech guru steering the ship. Also, as part of our mission, we are asking our friends to support their local libraries. Libraries run on a tight budget, and this year many of the local branches are unable to hold their annual fundraisers. So they need your help and support more than ever if they're to carry on their important work in the community. To make it easier for you, we'll provide links to the donation pages to our 3 county libraries in the comments below. We were delighted to see that the Cambria County libraries reopened this week. They have limited in-person services from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday to Friday. Curbside pickup is still available as it is in Bedford County and Somerset County. Our special guest this evening was featured in the 2019 Festival of Books in Somerset. While there, he also taught a class at Uptown Works. And because we're talking about Somerset, I'd love to give a special shout out to a few of our local partners there, to Somerset Inc., the Mary S. Biesecker Library, and to Laurel Arts. And how wonderful to see the Laurel Arts is also doing a soft reopening to the public this week. Best of luck. And one last shout out before I introduce tonight's guest, and that is to Ebensburg Legion 363. We thank you so much for your support tonight, and really happy to make that connection because it's a good tie-in to introduce our featured author this evening, who is retired military Don Helin. Don, thank you so much for your service, and thank you so much for joining us here tonight. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Hilary. It's great to be here, and I appreciate all the work that you and Dave put in to put this together. I know how much work it must be, and I admire Dave's skills, and I always have admired what you've been able to do. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Don. That's wonderful. And also wonderful, I hear you have some very good news to share with us.
I sure do. I found out about 2 weeks ago that my latest novel that I published, Roof of the World, just came out as a finalist in the 2020 Indie Book Awards. And as a matter of fact, they have to go virtual. Usually when you're a finalist or a winner, you have to go up to New York. But now, of course, everything's closed down. So it's going to be on TV on Friday night at 8 o'clock. So if any of you, your people have a chance, so we'd love to have you there. The other thing, Hilary, I think I may have mentioned to you that we've been doing is I've been doing a number of workshops on Zoom. I started out doing workshops on how to write a suspense novel. But then I've really gotten interested in memoirs. And of course, now with the incredibly crazy time that we have, you know, this is just like if you were alive when President Kennedy was shot or 9/11 or whatever, everybody remembers where they were at that time. Well, what we're doing now is we're teaching a webinar on how to write a memoir. And then my publisher, Headline Books, is going to be taking in 1,500-word memoirs, and if you make it, you'll be published. And so, for those of you that would like to write a memoir and have it published, You can get all kinds of information. I see that Dave has got the link up on the website. One is Zoom into Books, and that's a course that we're doing. And we've been doing it for about 4 weeks. And next Wednesday at noon, we're going to do a wrap-up. So if you're interested in being involved in writing a memoir, please join us, and we'd love to have you.
That's fantastic news, Don. Can I ask you, do people have to have any experience writing to attend your workshop and submit a story?
None at all. We, as a matter of fact, we have put no age requirements on it. There's some writing classes that, teenagers that are submitting. And it's just a matter of if we get a lot and they're good, a publisher's going to publish a couple of anthologies. So I think this is a great opportunity. We are beginning to get a few in. So I would kind of think, because, a memoir really is like a slice of life. It's not your whole life and autobiography. And what we teach is how to use the fictional techniques of writing a fictional book, creative nonfiction, to make your nonfiction memoir more exciting and more interesting. And that's what we've been working on. So we invite everybody to join us, and you're all welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Don. And talking of a slice of life, let me give a little bit of more information about you to our guests here tonight. And then I will pass the mic over to you.
Okay.
Okay. During his time in the military, Don Helin served at a number of stateside posts as well as overseas in Vietnam and Germany. He is the author of 6 thrillers that draw from his military experience, including 3 tours in the Pentagon. He writes for The Berg, a community magazine based in Harrisburg. His novel, Secret Assault, was selected as Best Suspense Thriller at the 2015 Indie Book Awards. His novel, Long Walk Home, won a 5-star review at Reader's Favorite Awards. His latest novel, Roof of the World, was just awarded a finalist in the 2020 Indie Book Awards because it's worth repeating. You can reach Don at www.donhelin.com.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that very kind introduction. And again, I'm delighted to be here. And what we wanted to talk about a little bit tonight is where in the world do writers get their ideas? Is there a file drawer up in the sky where you just kind of pull it open and say, hey, that would be a great idea? And I'm telling you that when you really think about it, ideas are everywhere. And what I'd like to do is just kind of briefly walk through the novels that I've done and tell your viewers where those ideas came from. Then the next step is to take that idea and begin to work on it. And we'll try to touch base with that at the end of our discussion. My first novel, which was published back in 2012, is Devil's Den. And that idea came because after I left the military, I moved to Perry County, which is only about an hour from Gettysburg. And I'm a history buff, and I love Gettysburg. And Elaine and I would go down there a lot. And we started taking ghost tours. Gettysburg is one of the most haunted places in the world. And so I thought, boy, I wonder how that might work. There were really 3 ideas that came to me for Devil's Den. The second idea was Elaine and I had taken a trip to Ireland with the musical group in the Harrisburg area. And so I thought, well, I'm going to take pretty good notes, and just one day I might be able to use it. Well, then I saw on the paper that James Whitey Burglar, I'm not sure if that name means anything, but he was the head of the Winter Hill Gang Mafia in Boston, went undercover for years. Then all of a sudden in 2012, somebody caught up with him. So I took those 3 ideas together and I said, well, let's do a premise what could this story be? And we made it where my hero takes his friend to Gettysburg. She wants to see if she can get a ghost, so find a ghost. So she runs out on the battlefield by Devil's Den, and she disappears. She's gone. She's the daughter of the National Security Advisor, and so they bring helicopters in, and she's disappeared. And of course, my hero, Zach, has spent a number of tours in Afghanistan and has a moderate case of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so he ends up having a flashback. When he comes to, she's gone. Of course, nobody will believe him, and he's got to find her. He goes back to the Pentagon, and a member of the Irish Mafia tries to kill him. So he's got to go to Ireland to find out why there's a contract on his life. Now, when Zach goes to Ireland, people are shooting at him. When Elaine and I went to Ireland, we just had musical instruments and a few beers and stuff like that. But that's where the ideas come from. And I always suggest that if you have an opportunity, like going overseas or whatever, take good notes, because that's how you can bring that story alive. So it's the little things. You go into a pub, a little bit of what it looks like, what it sounds like. So we're always interested in all of the senses. Now, my second novel, Secret Assault, you mentioned briefly that I spent a tour in Vietnam. And I was there shortly after the My Lai massacre. And I noticed in the paper that the My Lai massacre, I think it was the 45th anniversary or something like that. And I thought, I wonder, you always say, I wonder, how would that work? And I thought, what if the children, sons and daughters of those killed at the My Lai massacre should find a way to get to the States, immigrate to the States, and start trying to pick off some of the senior officers who were either involved in the shooting or seemed to be around and didn't do anything about it. And that's the genesis for the issue of Secret Assault. Now, the interesting part is, they always say no character is all good or all bad. So you have to get what the premise people call deficiencies. So my hero has a problem with post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, in Secret Assault, we find that his divorced wife ends up in jail, and so their daughter comes to visit with Zach. And all of a sudden, here he is as a single parent. And this is something, we can all understand that. I've been blessed with 3 wonderful daughters, and I know that I love them dearly, but sometimes they can be a little bit of a challenge. And so she ends up, when he's supposed to be saving the world in the Pentagon, she said, Dad, you're supposed to be at my soccer game. What happens next is that Zach goes home one day and he sees this guy going up to the talking tour. Well, Elaine and I had been up in Canada, and I got the idea for this guy. We were sitting in a coffee shop, and I love coffee shops. I'm sure that you all do too. And this guy came in, and he had orange hair, and he had earrings and nose rings, and he had the black leather around his wrists and black leather boots. And I said to Elaine, take his picture. I'll bet we'll be able to use it someday. When Zach comes home, he sees that guy up at the door, and he goes up, and she said, and the guy's got the orange hair and the earrings and the nose ring, and his daughter Laura says, Dad, guess what? This is Joe Bergler, and he is the lead guitar in the Evil Doers. And they play wonderful music. Wouldn't you like to go sometime? I know he's not exactly your sort of character. So this is what I call another deficiency, which is, maybe it's easier to say, a rock in his backpack, something that he's got to think about and work over. So basically what Secret Assault is all about is that sons and daughters of some of the people who were killed at My Lai end up coming and picking off some senior officers in the United States. The third story is called Angel's Revenge. And this is something that really bothered me. You know, I read a study that said that 20% of the female veterans getting out of the military have had problems with sexual assault or sexual harassment. And I thought, that's just not right. Then I thought, suppose a bunch of them get together and decide to take revenge against some of these guys. And all of a sudden, Zach finds that a couple of the lieutenant colonels that used to work for him are murdered, and they're all kind of dismembered. And I thought, oh my, that's pretty good. The other thing is that I saw an article in the paper about problems hacking into the Pentagon database. So I began to think about that. And I thought, well, let's suppose that somebody hacks into the Pentagon database and steals a Predator drone, you know, which is capable of firing torpedoes and rockets. And Zach's got to get in the middle of that. So that I usually try to have 2 stories in each one of my novels, because that way, when one story is going along and Zach's in trouble, then you flip to the other one and people say, oh, what happened? What happened? I've got to find out what happened. So I normally, if I can, try to have a couple of stories. Now, the 4th novel is called Long Walk Home. And that was kind of interesting how I got that idea. Every summer, I used to go to Thriller Fest, which is run by international thriller writers. And they said they had a discount at the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan that you could get a room for only $295 a night. I thought, you know, it's kind of running kind of hard. But I found there's a guest house on Staten Island. And I thought, oh, what a way to do it. So every morning I'd get up and I'd drive to the parking lot, and then I'd catch the Staten Island ferry. And, you know, at 6:30 in the morning, I'd be floating across on the ferry with the sun shining on the Statue of Liberty. And I did that for about 4 years. And then I began to think, I wonder, what would happen if somebody hijacked the Staten Island ferry? And I thought, why would anybody want to do that? And how would they do it? And that became kind of the key point about Long Walk Home. And of course, what happens to poor Zach is his daughter happens to be on the ferry when it's hijacked. And then there's an impact of the mafia there also. So that's the idea that I had for Long Walk Home. Now, the one that just won the award, Roof of the World, I'm very proud of that, because it won not only for thriller, but in cross-culture, because Roof of the World is tied to Tibet. And when Elaine and I were in Tibet, we love the Tibetan people, and they're wonderful. But you can just see how the Chinese put their boot on the neck of the Tibetan people. And so I began to think about that, and I think, how could we end up trying to help them a little bit? If you read the history, back in the 60s, we actually had the CIA helping the Tibetan people. But then when we went to open up China in the 70s, we pulled back and have kind of left the Tibetan people more or less on their own now. And so I thought, well, could we do something to help them? And they were trying to figure out how that might be. And so I took an idea, and I thought a Chinese assassin, and a Chinese assassin came in and killed the mother of the Tibetan monk who kind of leading the attacks against China. And of course, the United States can't have a Chinese assassin operating on US soil. So they end up capturing the host and arresting the lady that Zach's with. So he has to fight his way to Nepal to try to get help. So that's basically the story of Roof of the World. Now, what I try very hard to do is a lot of people think these military thrillers are just for these hunky guys, but about 70% of my readers are women. And that's because I always try to put romance in there. And so actually, I've had some fun with that because in Devil's Den, my first novel, the person to help Zach was an Irish medium. Well, people after a while began to say, whatever happened to Shelia? So we brought her back in book 4. So that's been a lot of fun to try to build not only a storyline, but also a personal touch. So we get a personal touch with Zach and his daughter, with Zach and his friends, and that adds to the storyline. Now, what we try to do, I don't know how many of your viewers have heard of a premise, but a premise is where you start with your novel. And basically, you start out and things are going along in the status quo. And then you have a character, and your character has some deficiencies. And then there's something that happens. He's on a quest, or she's on a quest. And of course, he has some sort of relationships. And then there's what they call a change bomb. Something happens that drives the story, and they continue to have pressure and release, pressure and release. And one of the examples that we used, and your viewers will probably figure out what story this is, but let's take a big city cop who moves to a small beach town, and they're dependent on tourism. And so the big city cop is having a lot of trouble adjusting. He hears there may be a shark out there, but people don't believe him. And all of a sudden, the change bomb is a shark attack. So he and 2 other people have to go out after the shark. So basically, that is kind of what we call the guts of the story. It gives you some place to start, and you just keep fleshing it out. So when you get your ideas, then it's kind of exciting to have a technique of how you might be able to flesh that out. Well, let me just give you a snap preview. I just turned in my 7th novel, and that's called The Reunion. And it opens up, I'm sure most of your viewers have gone back to high school reunions, and you're never sure what you're going to get into, what you're going to find with a high school reunion. People change. Well, my hero, Zach, is standing out on a patio of a hotel talking to a friend when a sniper shoots her, tries to kill her. And all of a sudden, they find something's going on. And as they tie it all together, there's a retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who thinks we're not doing enough to put down all of our enemies. He thinks that the people in the Middle East are getting by with all kinds of stuff. So he opens up and starts the Patriot Party. And actually, they bring in, Zach finds out that they bring in a Chinese professor who's an expert on artificial intelligence. And they use artificial intelligence to cook the books to see if they can't figure out a way to turn the election to them. So that's number 7, and I'm hoping that will come out the end of summer because we want to get it out. He'll be running in the presidential election, and I'd like to get it out before the election. I think that would make it timely. So that's kind of what I've tried to do, is share with your viewers, Hilary, a little bit about each of my stories. And then once you have your idea and you have your character, and your character has some pluses and minuses, then you can begin to move through the story. And that's what has worked for me. So let me turn it back to you and see what, if we have any questions or whatever, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic, Don. That's absolutely fascinating. And to everybody watching, please do write your questions. If you're following us on Facebook, put your questions in the comments. If you're here in the chat, we have some attendees here. You can put your questions in the chat box. But I have a few questions actually for you, Don, if you don't mind. So you talk about your character, and he stays with the stories through every book. And by the way, I'm not sure I'd want to be his friend if you could just be standing there talking to him and be shot. So
Yeah, well, you have to be careful who you hang out with these days.
Absolutely. But now you're going into your seventh book. How do you keep him interesting?
That's a great question. You know, what you have to do is make changes in the character enough. Now, I think that one thing going from book 1 to 2, I added another, what the premise guys call a deficiency. I'm not sure my daughters would like to be called a deficiency, but you're fleshing out the story. And also there is a small group that he works for. He's a senior coordinator for a little team that works for the President's National Security Advisor. And so what they have to do is, when the National Security Advisor, there's so much bureaucracy in Washington. I mean, it's crazy. And so the team kind of tries to cut through that bureaucracy. So you have these, each one of the team is a Hispanic, a lieutenant colonel. Another is a pilot. Another is a former FBI agent. So they team up and work together at trying to build up the storyline. And Zach doesn't change markedly, but each story is different enough. And so far, we've been able to keep him pretty involved. I know when I was at International Thriller Writers, one of my mentors was Lee Childs. And as you probably know, his character, Jack Reacher, goes along, and he doesn't have a lot of mail to bring along. So he gets into interesting situations, and each one is a little bit different. And so that's how you try to keep them involved. And it's a challenge, but so far, plus the positive side is people begin to like the characters. I've had them ask me, hey, when is Shalia coming back? They really enjoyed her. And then I have a kind of a tall, rough and tough female cop from one of the DC suburbs that usually works with Zach. And so they have some interesting relationships and things that they're doing together. So I think it makes for a good story, but that's a good question. It's a challenge to keep that alive.
I'm sure it is. Do you think you will try a standalone novel, or
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What?
Is standalone novel in the pipeline, or do you intend to keep on with the series?
Oh, I'm going to keep. Zach is in. Number 7 is Zach is the one who's going to be challenged to do something when they're finding out the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is causing a lot of problems and using artificial intelligence to try to steal the election, and with the help of the Chinese. And so that one, and Zach's going to be up to his neck with that one. So.
Excellent. All right. We have a question from Ellen Roth, who also says congratulations on your award.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Ellen was with us last week, wasn't she?
Oh, yes. It was a wonderful.
I enjoyed her presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. She asks, how much historical research do you do? For example, China versus Tibet, the conflict, and how long does it take to write your books?
I do a lot of research. Now, with the book on Tibet and with the book including Ireland, there was travels. So I always try to, and I'm sure Ellen understands this, take very good notes of what I saw, what I heard, what I smelled. And when you go into an Irish pub, you want to bring it alive for those people. And there's the basic history of Tibet that I did a lot of research on. But when I was over in Tibet, I was able to sit down and talk to a number of the monks about what their thoughts were, what they had seen, and all that. And I was able to bring that in. So what you really want to do, and I'm sure Ellen realizes this, what you really want to do is get the story as deep as you can, but make it interesting. You don't want a whole lot of detail in there. Sometimes it's just a few sentences about something is enough to get your reader's attention. And one of the things I always try to do is, I've always heard, trust your readers. You don't need to dump a lot of information on them. You just need to give them enough so it kind of whets their appetite and kind of puts it in little sections. And then that seems to work for me.
Excellent. I like that. Denise Weaver is very appreciative of your concrete examples. She says they're very helpful. Thank you. And she also asks about your writing discipline. Do you work on one book at a time, or do you have several going? And what about the articles you write? You write quite regular articles, I believe. How do you keep it all straight?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you, Denise. Actually, she's the one that helped me so much last year. And so she's just a good friend, and it was good to see her today at the webinar at noon. But the timing wise, I usually have about 3 novels kind of somewhere at any one time. Normally, I'm taking the idea that we've talked about and beginning to develop a premise. At the same time, I'm working on, and the way I keep it fresh is I'm working on the one that will be coming out to get reviewers and to get my readers. And then the third novel is usually the one that's out. And that's the one that we're going out and doing book signings on. So I'm not able to just every morning get up at 7 o'clock and work for 4 hours. Some days we'll be writing. Some days we'll be dealing with critique groups, because I'm a big fan. I think critique groups are so important. And sometimes, of course, it hasn't been very much recently. I'm on the road doing signings. And I guess I'm a social enough being that I need to get relief from just writing and getting out. And also, I remember I had a friend who told me, lots of times when his wife would come into the room and she'd see him just staring off in space. And she said, "What in the world are you doing?" And he said, "I'm writing." So I don't necessarily have to be at a computer. If I get along someplace and then all of a sudden I run into a snag or something like that, then I'll just let it go and I'll go along and do something different. And then, if I'm out biking or walking or writing, whatever, all of a sudden I'll get that idea that can kind of get it moving again. But that's a good idea. That's a good question, Denise. Thank you.
All right, and we had another question come in, but you've kind of answered it. Jano de Castro asks about writing your subsequent books, and then she says, "Okay, so you pre-developed premise." That answers my question. Okay. Thank you for asking.
Sure. Hey, Janet, thank you. Nice to hear from you. I'm glad you're on the webinar.
Absolutely. And we've talked quite a lot about characters, Don, but what about settings? How do you develop your realistic settings?
Oh, that's so important, because, in every chapter, it's what I call setting the table. You can't have your character floating in the air. So, and that's where I try to take really good notes. When I was down in Gettysburg, I went up to Devil's Den and I stood there and I looked around and I saw what was there and what the view was, and Zach when he opens the book, he goes to a pub, and I went to that pub and I could tell you the tables and what the waitresses and the music they were playing. So you can kind of bring your story alive. And I think that's so important. Same thing with Ireland. I forced myself to go to a number of pubs over there and have a beer and all that sort of stuff. But then you go in and you can hear the music, And so I note what kind of music, and there's 12 guys leaning, and they're not just drinking a beer, they've got their beer and they've got a shot that they pour into their beer, so it's just, and you walk over and there's small dark round tables and stuff like that. So you take the notes and that really brings that setting alive. I think setting is so important. Oftentimes I hear people arguing about, hey, plot's more important than character, whatever, but I don't think you can forget setting. And I'm finding that readers really like being taken someplace different. And that's why I think Roof of the World is doing well, because not very many people have had the pleasure of getting to Tibet and Nepal and Bhutan. All of them are in the book, and we've explained and told them what it's like and what the people are like, and so they can experience that. And it's a lot cheaper than going there, and you can have a lot of fun doing it. But another good question. Setting, I think, is critical. I really work hard to bring it alive. Oh, the other thing, let me just add one more point. The other thing that's helped me a lot with that is I'm a travel writer. And my travel writing, I write for the Burr. And lots of times, my editor will send me out to do an article. And the first thing I do is try to get my hands around the place, what it's like, so the reader will know what they're seeing and what's going on there. And I think that's very important. So I'm a fan of setting. I think that's really important.
That's great, Don. Well, I actually have been to Nepal. It's a wonderful country. I've hiked in the hills.
Oh, isn't it great?
Nice. Oh, it's fantastic, yes. I hear it's changed a lot, so I'm going to have to go back. And I've been to one or two pubs in my time as well. So.
Well, the thing about Tibet you have to be careful is the altitude. I mean, the reason they call it the Roof of the World is that Lhasa is 12,000 feet. And if you have any problems breathing or whatever, it's going to get to you. It's very easy to get a headache. You have to be careful. You don't drink any alcohol. Well, you can, but you're better off if you don't. And it's very easy to get winded as you walk around because you're just not used to that. But still, so beautiful, and the people are so nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of human kindness there. I haven't been following the chat. I'll check in a minute, but I did want to ask you also, so from military to writer, how did that path happen?
Well, that was a challenge. When I got out of the military, there's not a big demand in the civilian world for a guy that's pretty good to writing Army regulations. And I thought, what next? And what really saved me is I happened to see an article in the Washington Post that the Washington Post was hosting a travel writing symposium. And that went for 8 weeks. And I really got that down and enjoyed it. And we both love to travel. And as you may remember, my wife's an artist, so she's a pretty good photographer. And so I spent 6 years as a travel writer and went around to different places. And then I guess I'd been a travel writer for about 3 years when I found Pen Writers. And I've been active with them ever since. They've been so helpful. The first, I was involved in the read and critique this go round. And that's how I got started. I attended a read and critique. And Nancy Martin was my read and critiquer. And I said, oh man, she is going to love this book. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. But then I got to thinking, she had a lot of concerns. And I got to thinking, well, at that point, Nancy had published some 50 novels. So I thought, I wonder if she knows what she's talking about. And so I took all of her suggestions, and 18 months later, my first novel came out. So Nancy and I have chuckled a lot about that, but I think that Pen Writers and all of the wonderful mentors I found there were very helpful to me.
That's wonderful. As you know, Don, Pen Writers is very, very close to my heart. And I also have to mention that you haven't just participated in Pen Writers receiving support from mentors, but you have become a mentor to so many people, to so many writers. So,
Well,
really,
thank you. That's important. You know, there's not much I can do. You know, I had so many of the writers there that helped me a lot. And there's not a lot I can do to help Nancy Martin, but I think you play it forward. And, you know, I'm a mentor with the Mystery Writers of America. I'm always happy to be involved with the read and critique. And any way I can be involved to help, I'm always glad to do it. And it's fun. I love new writers.
it is fun. It is. Excellent. Don, so we should be wrapping up now. So if people still have questions, will you go and look at our Facebook page after? And if anyone has any questions, you'll be able to answer them there.
Sure, absolutely. And please, my website, www.donhelin.com, and there's a section, Contact Don. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask it. And if remember, we're having that webinar next Wednesday at noon, and you just go to the Headline Books website, and you can register there. And also, if you want, you can be involved in writing a memoir.
That's so exciting. I really appreciate you sharing that, and I hope everybody will join you.
Yes, I hope so too.
Excellent. And one very, very important question, one is, where can people buy your books?
Oh, absolutely. The two bookstores, both have my books, but right now it's very hard for bookstores to be open. So they can go right to headlinebooks.com, and my publisher has plenty of books. And also, from the number of events we've done together, many of them are already signed. And she said, for purposes of our webinar tonight, she's waiving the travel, the postage. Thank you. Got one too many words on my mouth. She's waiving the postage, so she sends them postage free. So please feel free to go to Headline Books, or go to either one of those bookstores. I think they're doing some online, but I'm not sure how much. But any one of the three would be more than happy to help you out.
That's wonderful. And Dave, our tech expert guru, is pulling up the two bookstores that Don is mentioning, which are Cupboard Maker Books and
Right.
Mystery Shop in Mechanicsburg.
Right. A wonderful bookstore.
Excellent. I do love an indie bookstore. So.
Oh, I do too. We got to keep them going.
We do. We need them. So, all right. Don, this has been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you being with us tonight.
Well, I have to thank you and Dave. I know how much work it takes to do something like this. And I know that you do a wonderful job with Pen Writers and all these different things. So my hat's off to you, and I appreciate the invitation. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much, Don. And next week, we are featuring another pen writer favorite, USA Today bestselling mystery author, Annette Dashery.
Oh, she's wonderful. Longtime friend. As a matter of fact, we were on a read and critique together this last time that Pen Writers did. So we really enjoy each other.
Excellent. That'll be a good one. Hopefully you can join us next Wednesday after.
Sure. We'll give it a try.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, Don. Thank you all our guests for being here tonight. And if you still have questions, Don will answer them in the Facebook chat, or you can contact him directly. And it's been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, Don.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Hilary and Dave. Appreciate it.
All right. Good night.
Night.